This is Dr.RED Panda.
Imagine this. You sign up for a harmless university experiment. Easy money, a few days of your time, nothing dangerous. But by the second day, people are already breaking. Grown adults are crying. Someone is locked in a dark closet. Guards are laughing while prisoners beg to leave. And here's what should scare you the most. No one was forced to be cruel. They wanted to be. Because the moment you give ordinary people power and remove consequences, something primitive wakes up. Something ugly. Something terrifying. Right in the middle of it all, the lead researcher watched it happen and didn't stop it. Oh, before we go further, I'm Dr. Red Panda, and on this channel we don't just talk about history. We expose the hidden psychology that proves any one of us could be far darker than we believe. So ask yourself this: if you walked into that basement and no one was watching, if you had been randomly assigned a role, would power have changed you? Or would you have been strong enough to resist it? Today, we're stepping inside the experiment so disturbing. It was shut down early because humanity couldn't handle what it revealed. The day good people lost control. None of them realized they were walking straight into a psychological trap. It began with a simple newspaper ad, the kind most people would barely notice. Male college students needed for a paid psychological study. $15 per day. In the early 1970s, that was good money. Easy money. All you had to do was show up. No danger. No risk. Just research. Dozens applied. After careful screening, only the healthiest candidates were selected. No history of violence. No psychological disorders. No criminal records. These were not unstable people. They were ordinary young men, the kind you'd sit next to in class, grab coffee with, or trust to watch your belongings. Psychologically normal. That detail matters more than you might think. Because what happened next wasn't driven by who they were, but by where they were placed. The researchers randomly divided them into two groups: prisoners and guards. No special qualifications. No personality matching. Just the flip of a coin. Which means something deeply unsettling. The difference between kindness and cruelty that week was decided entirely by chance. The prisoners were sent home and told to wait for further instructions. But they didn't have to wait long. Without warning, real police officers arrived at their houses. Sirens, flashing lights, neighbors watching from their windows. One by one, the students were arrested. They were searched, handcuffed, read their rights, and placed into the back of patrol cars. Remember, this was supposed to be a study, yet suddenly it didn't feel like one. At the station, they were fingerprinted, photographed, processed, then blindfolded and transported to a basement at Stanford University that had been converted into a makeshift jail. Cold hallways, locked doors, steel bars. It was not elaborate, but it didn't need to be, because the moment someone believes they've lost control, the brain fills in the rest. The prisoners were stripped, deloused, and issued identical smocks with numbers stitched across the chest. No names, only numbers. Chains were fastened around their ankles. Not heavy enough to restrain movement, but impossible to ignore. A constant reminder, you are no longer in charge. Meanwhile, the guards were given uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, and wooden batons. No extensive training. Just one instruction: maintain order. They were not told to be harsh. They were not told to punish. The researchers simply wanted to observe what would happen. First, everything seemed almost playful. Some guards leaned into their roles with theatrical authority, lowering their voices, mimicking the posture of real correctional officers. Some prisoners laughed nervously, treating the experience like an unusual campus activity. But something subtle was already shifting. Uniforms create distance. Numbers erase identity. Power changes posture before it changes behavior. And when people begin to feel anonymous, they often start doing things they never imagined they were capable of. What no one expected was how quickly the atmosphere would transform. because the experiment was scheduled to last 2 full weeks. It started unraveling in less than 48 hours. When power turns ordinary people cruel. By the second day, the mood inside the basement had changed. What began as an experiment was starting to feel disturbingly real. It started with something small: resistance. A group of prisoners decided they didn't like being ordered around. They blocked their cell doors with their beds, refused commands, and shouted back at the guards. At first, it looked almost like college students rebelling against camp counselors. But the guards didn't see it that way. To them, this wasn't a game anymore. It was a challenge to their authority. And once people feel their authority is threatened, something dangerous tends to surface. The guards responded quickly and creatively. They brought in fire extinguishers and blasted freezing carbon dioxide into the cells to force the prisoners back. Beds were ripped away. The ringleaders were dragged into solitary confinement. Then things escalated. Instead of treating all prisoners equally, the guards began rewarding obedience and punishing defiance. They created a privilege cell. Prisoners who cooperated were given better food, blankets, even the right to wash. The others were left uncomfortable, exhausted, and humiliated. It was classic divide and conquer, and it worked. Within hours, suspicion spread among the prisoners. Friendships cracked. Some began blaming each other for the punishments. The group was fragmenting. And here's the unsettling part. No researcher told the guards to do this. There was no script encouraging cruelty. The guards were inventing these tactics on their own. Power wasn't just changing their behavior, it was rewriting it. One guard, in particular, seemed to transform overnight. Other participants would later describe him as unusually inventive in his punishments, making prisoners repeat meaningless tasks, waking them at odd hours for counts, reminding them constantly who was in control. Not because he had to, because he could. Meanwhile, the prisoners were changing too, but in the opposite direction. Some became quiet, obedient, almost invisible. Others showed clear signs of stress. One prisoner began breathing rapidly, his thoughts scattered. He shouted in anger, then suddenly broke into uncontrollable crying. At first, the guards accused him of faking, assuming he was just trying to escape the study. But he wasn't acting. He was having a real emotional breakdown. Less than 36 hours in, he had to be released. Think about that for a moment. A psychologically healthy college student, undone in a day and a half. But even that wasn't enough to stop what was unfolding. Instead of questioning the experiment, some guards grew stricter, convinced they needed even more control to prevent further rebellion. And the prisoners? Many stopped asking to leave. Not because they were comfortable, but because something even more powerful had taken hold. They had begun to accept the roles. When identity is stripped away, when every movement is watched, when your number replaces your name, the line between playing a part and becoming it starts to disappear. By now, the basement no longer resembled a study. It felt like a real prison, complete with power struggles, psychological warfare, and emotional collapse. And perhaps the most chilling detail of all, people outside the experiment began to forget it wasn't real either. Visitors spoke to guards instead of researchers. Parents asked about prison rules. Even the lead scientist found himself thinking less like an observer and more like a prison superintendent. The situation wasn't just escalating. It was consuming everyone involved. By day 6, what was happening inside that basement had gone far beyond academic curiosity. It had become a portrait of how frighteningly fast ordinary people can adapt to cruelty when the environment makes it feel acceptable. And what the researchers witnessed next forced them to confront a question far more disturbing than they ever anticipated. Not why are they behaving this way, but how far could this go if no one stepped in? When power turns ordinary people cruel. On the 6th day, someone from outside the experiment walked into the basement and immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. Christina Maslach, a young psychologist, had been invited to observe the study. She watched as prisoners stood silently with bags over their heads. Guards barked orders without hesitation, and exhaustion hung thick in the air. Then she asked a question no one else had stopped to ask. "What are you doing to these boys?" The lead researcher, Philip Zimbardo, was caught off guard. Until that moment, he hadn't fully realized how far things had gone. Because somewhere along the way, he had stopped acting like a scientist and started thinking like a prison warden. That realization hit hard. Within hours, the experiment was terminated. It had been planned for 2 weeks. It lasted 6 days. But what those 6 days revealed continues to unsettle psychologists decades later. The study suggested something deeply uncomfortable. Evil doesn't always come from evil people. Sometimes it comes from ordinary individuals placed in powerful roles, inside environments that quietly reward cruelty. Give people authority, remove accountability, normalize control, and many won't resist. They'll adapt. So the real question isn't whether those students were secretly monsters. It's this: how different are we from them? Most of us like to believe we would have refused, pushed back, walked away. Psychology offers a more humbling possibility: that we are far more influenced by situation and power than we ever want to admit, which makes this less of a story about a basement prison and more of a mirror. So be honest with yourself. If no one was watching, if authority told you it was necessary, if everyone else accepted it, where would you draw the line? I'm curious what you think. Would you have resisted or slowly become part of the system? Tell me in the comments. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm DR.RED Panda. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.